and
Go ahead.
false start, 5 yards. Welcome to Myth Informed with your hosts Brian Edward and Sean Frasick. Today we have in the middle Dr. Richard Carrier. If you've been in around the atheist world or the Christian apologetic world, you've probably heard his name before. He's a PhD. He has done his postdoctorate studies work. He raised funds to look into whether or not Jesus was historical, right? And write the God question. He has enormous amount of books. He's also, if you don't want like the God debate at all, he's a historian in ancient history. Like his books on the Roman Empire are fascinating. If you want to see kind of where some of the stuff came from, like definitely take a look at Richard Carrier. Is it .info?
RichardCarrier.info.
Okay, good. Yeah. Sometimes like you forget, not .com.info.
Yeah.
Check it out. He's got courses. He's on a tour right now.
Yeah. Found him milling around in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's really just a fountain of knowledge, whether you agree with the God question or not. But obviously he's an atheist. Welcome, Dr. Carrier.
Yeah. Glad to be here. Yeah.
So for a lot of people like Richard Carrier, actually, I hated Richard Carrier when I first got into mythicism. Because of tribalism, because DM Murdoch made me think that you were the worst person ever.
Of course, yeah.
And you guys had that feud going on, and like we started getting mythicism. And
for those that don't know, DM Murdoch is another mythicist, and if you still don't know what that means, it defines
look
like
it
up. We look at historical figures in religious texts, and are they historical? Are they not?
But it was just funny because like that was my first introduction into atheism and mythicism, and you know, I started listening to your work because I liked listening to people that I'm supposed to not like, you know, and I started listening to all the videos you were putting together, and it was just fantastic. I couldn't argue with any of it and became such a huge fan. And you were actually one of our first, speakers
That's right.
at Mythcon.
Yeah.
And
at the very first Mythcon, April.
That's right. Mythcon 1.
25th, 2015.
Yeah, we've had a really long friendship, and we've enjoyed every time you've been here and all the things we've done together. So
yeah,
really excited to have
you
you today.
Yeah.
So
tell us about your tour. You ended up in Milwaukee because what are you up to?
Well, I do a variety of tours. I do pub meets. Sometimes I have lectures and talks and things. I mean, really, a lot of these tours I'm visiting girlfriends essentially, and then I get work along the way, and I might have film shoots. There was a documentarian shooting in LA, so I went to one of my girlfriend's 35th birthday party out there, and then another day went and got the shoot done. And so I do that, and you know, I'm on my way home. I'll visit yet another girlfriend on my way to Columbus.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, that's
there's a lot of girlfriends.
I do, yeah. I have a few.
Well, it's interesting because like you're on this tour now, and one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is the status of atheism. And I know you're meeting with a lot of your fan base comes out of kind of the organized atheist community, if you will. And it was just interesting picking your brain over the last couple of days, seeing some of the things that they're saying and thinking and some of the things they're looking forward to. We personally think the atheist community it's becoming irrelevant. It's at the point where there's not a lot of innovation. There's a lot of people that don't want to change with the times, and a lot of infighting. And it's like one of those things where it needs to change in order to become relevant and exciting again. And I'm just curious as to like, what have you been seeing? Are we off base? Do we, you know, are you kind of seeing some of the same stuff, or are people like super excited and a lot of new people are coming in? Like, what's your take on organized atheism right now?
I'm not really sure. Like, it's in a big transitional period, really. Like that, I don't know where things are going to wash out. There've been, you know, tons of kinds of issues have come up, and money has left the movement, and enthusiasm has left. I know a lot of people are less and less interested in organized atheism in a variety of different ways, but are still enthusiastic about various topics. So like mythicism is really popular. It's one of my, I get a lot of fans and readers come out to my events and pub meets and stuff to hang out and talk about that. But I still have a lot of interest from people who are just in it for the philosophy side of it.
Okay.
But a lot of them are interested more in like the positive philosophy of it, right? Rather than, you know, fighting Christian apologists. It's more like, what is our philosophy? And that's where you get into the discussions of politics and values and things like that come up too, but also just epistemology and other things like that. And there's still like, you know, I'd say maybe 20% contingent who are like, yeah, let's debate the Christians and like the old fashioned resurrection, the existence of God and all of that.
Yeah.
But we did one of those, right?
Yeah,
where you talked
right.
with Justin Bass and we were debating the historicity of the resurrection.
And those get in audiences, although I mean they attract mixed audiences, right? So you get a lot you get Christians and atheists.
Right.
We have 70-30.
Yeah, religious people across the board, not even necessarily Christians. Sometimes.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, and it's nice too when you're having a debate that the 30% minority is a pretty big minority, so you don't feel outnumbered. You don't want to be the only guy or one of the two guys that are on the other side.
Yeah, I would say more Christians come to atheist Christian dialogue events than atheists come to things that are organized by Christians, right?
Oh, for sure.
That's true.
That's a great point.
Yeah, like if I'm going to debate a thing, and unless there's an atheist organization promoting it, there will be maybe like 5% of the audience will be atheists. And like when I did William Lane Craig debate, that was many years ago.
Yeah,
it was like an audience of 1,000 people, and there were maybe 50 atheists at most, right?
And I think that was kind of more of the golden age of atheism, too, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of those debates were happening. Well, it was on the back end of the golden age of organized atheism. When I say that, is what I mean by this, as far as it being irrelevant, I think atheism is the victim of their own success.
Correct.
You have so many people, Dawkins and Harris and all these people really push the narrative and challenge a lot of religious people to the point where atheism is seen as accepted.
Yeah, we're mainstreamed now.
Correct.
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that they made enough movement. I mean, I'm going to cut into Ronnie Wines with Super Chat. Just says thank you. All right, we appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So, but if you want to ask a question, fire that back in.
Yeah, but I think right now we're seeing atheism as there's nothing new to be discussed. People are really sick of the God debate, and people are looking elsewhere for content. And with the political spectrum the way it is right now, I think a lot of atheists are talking more political and social topics.
But I don't think maybe you can, before you answer, Dr. Carrier, like I don't think that people are uninterested. I think that that other forces are more interesting or more compelling. And just put it on the back burner.
But it is the enthusiasm is shrinking in numbers, really. So like it's still out there. There's still people who are interested in that topic. But
especially people coming out of religion.
Yeah. It's just there's fewer of them that want to go to a conference and just hear another lecture on how to refute the existence of God, for example.
Or like the same PowerPoint presentation that you saw at a different conference.
But if you're looking for a community, though, that you were, and if you've been ostracized from your own community, then it becomes a big deal.
This is the thing. So it's like really events. If you want to just focus on that aspect of the movement, if you're looking at like conferences, talks, mini conferences, anything like that. The thing that people are looking for is, like you said, community, right? They want to come commiserate with like-minded people or have interesting conversations with, people like that.
Or just can be uncensored, to be uncensored.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's not so much that specifically though, but the thing is that what is really the issue that's really hitting the world in the last like 3 or 4 years is politics and values. Like that's really coming to a head, and there's a huge polarization. People have been talking about the polarization of like the liberals and the conservatives and the Democrats and the Republicans for years. Yeah. But now we've got it's spread into the whole culture. So you have like the alt-right and you have like the extremist left. You've got like all different kinds of things. And these are things that are really pressing. So you have like the Trump presidency going on, and that's really like created a whole bunch of issues that are really existential for people.
Yeah. And this just wasn't the case in, say, 1995.
No, I mean, it used to be, school prayer, and it used to be like all of these microaggressions against atheists by the Christian community that we were like fighting at the time, not being accepted, prejudice against atheists,
right? Having to say the Hail Mary to be on your football team, something like that.
Yeah, all of those things used to be pressing. Now those things aren't so pressing anymore. It's not that they've gone away. There's still prejudice against atheists. There's still church-state threats and things like that. But they're not, like I said, they're no longer the main concern of a lot of people. Now they are in some places, like you go to Alabama or Lincoln, Nebraska, like you still see a little bit of the old school interest there, because they're beleaguered. They're still dealing with like Christians doing all kinds of crazy stuff that are threaten atheist rights and atheist community and things like that. But in the broader country, though, it's the thing that people want to talk about is how do we fix the social problems and the political problems we're dealing with now? Yeah. That's the thing where people want community. They want that. And I think people are taking different tactics or different approaches to that. Some just want to go to the echo chamber where they can, feel comfortable and not be challenged and not like face the hard question of like, actually, how do we move forward when we are a divided country?
Right.
And then there are other people who are like, actually, I want to engage. I want to see both sides talk to each other, try to understand each other, and see if there is some common ground. Can we work together in some things and refuse to work together in other things? Or are we just going to like go run away into our separate echo chambers and achieve nothing because we can't achieve any majority or any common ground that we can actually move forward and affect changes in society rather than just each side doing nothing? It's like Congress getting nowhere when you have like the balance of the Democrats and the Republicans, and neither one will give compromise for anything, and you get no legislation coming out of Congress. So we're having that problem now with society and this conversation about values and how we want to organize our culture. We're going nowhere because no one is willing to compromise or listen to each other as to how we can actually get a majority to actually push forward on something and actually make changes that matter. And
so
that's the kind of thing.
What is the organized atheist movement supposed to be? Like what are its goals or its aims in your opinion?
Well, of course, there are a variety of them. You have still the traditional like Freedom from Religion Foundation, taking the legal cases towards
separates church and state.
Yeah,
so you could partner with theists on that too, right?
Right. There's and they do because you have atheists. No, you have what's the other
Camp Quest?
No. The church group. There's the head of it. They do the church. A lot of the separation of church and state is actually run by a Christian. There's actually an organization that we've atheists have worked with before.
Okay, I actually didn't know.
But
it's escaping me. But
yeah, I don't know why I'm. It's such an obvious name, and it's really leaving my brain. No, but that's going on. So that's an example of where you can cross the aisle of where there's a lot of disagreement, but you can agree on one thing and work together. And there's a lot of interests like that could do that. Where like we have a common interest, like we both want to make abortion abundant, cheap, and legal and safe.
Abundant?
Well, no. Available.
Available. All right.
Yeah. Try to end these restrictions on access to abortion, and also push better birth control education and better access to birth control, because that's the thing that actually like reduces abortions is people actually practicing.
Yeah, and you can have a secular pro-life argument as long as you include birth control. I think Christopher Hitchens was a secular pro-lifer.
Yeah. And you can have, but the point being is that there are a lot of Christians who are on our side on that. So like that are actually that don't like this idea of the church exhausting its energy politically on taking away the abortion rights from women. They actually want to improve that situation and have more reasonable, practical solutions to what they see as the problem that we actually agree with. So we could actually work together with them to do that. So there's people who have specific issues they want to do. And some people it's women's rights. Some people it's closing the wage gap. Like, what do we do about that? Like, we can have a conversation about what causes that, what could be done to like resolve that. And so those people have a lot of different issues, and they don't all have to be the same thing. So you ask like, what should the atheist movement be doing? There isn't one thing the atheist movement should be doing. There's atheism is a community with a lot of different special interest groups within it.
Yes.
And
which is going to like create the climate for divisions.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not
special interest.
Well, that's the thing is it's weird because we're willing to work with people we disagree with on fundamental worldview issues because we work with Christians all the time, right? So when atheists like absolutely refuse to work with each other because of ideological divisions and things like that, it doesn't make sense to me because like they're treating their fellow atheists worse than they treat Christians. And aren't willing to see it's like, we don't have to agree on everything we can work on narrow things. So I think like,
but this is true with like the most fundamentalist religions will treat the religion that's closest to them the worst.
Yeah. But
I mean, we'll look at ISIS, not to make the comparison to ISIS, but their main target is the Shia.
Well, yeah,
right. It's not the Americans.
Famously, Al Qaeda has murdered far more Muslims than
and specifically Shia Muslims because they don't believe the right version. So that makes them even worse because they're close.
Well, what I think is just this narrative that's becoming more and more prevalent is when I first got into the atheist world, it was always celebrated to talk to somebody you didn't agree with. And having those debates.
I know. I don't understand how that's gone away.
But now it seems like
you can't have a civil discussion with people.
If you can't talk to somebody, that doesn't agree with you or isn't on your social justice team or your anti or whatever, then you're the worst, and then you get lumped in with the person that you're debating. And You know, we
That's
obviously
right,
we
yeah.
have you coming to Mythcon 5 this year, talking to Sargon of Akkad, and we saw kind of the campaign we went through last year just for having Sargon on stage talking to Thomas Smith. And one of the things that you did last year was amazing to us, and it was like one of those things where you just constantly getting beat down on Twitter and beat down, and then I see this link that says this is why MM is right and this is why the critics are wrong. Like that was like such a huge, like it just really helped me like emotionally read that.
Yeah.
And it was great to see that someone has, you know, someone understands the importance of having these discussions, and someone that's been around, you know, for a while in this community and is a leader in the community. And but it's just really bizarre to me, like what happened to wanting to think critically and challenge people you don't agree with. I think that's one of the biggest things that's changing.
Well, it reminds me of like this again, like the analogy with how we deal with Christians. The best debate I ever had with a Christian was on the resurrection, sort of traditional atheist argument, the resurrection of Jesus. And the best debate I ever did, the one that I liked the most was the second debate I did with Mike Licona. And the first debate we did together was a very traditional, straightforward, combative debate. Like all debates are organized to be battles, right?
Right.
But
straightforward, combative. That's great.
Yeah. Well, the second debate though, we had a little bit of that with the initial podium time, but the rest of the debate was structured as we would just sit in comfy chairs facing each other and ask each other questions. And the goal of the debate, like that we agreed on, was we each want to try and understand why do you believe what you believe.
Right.
Rather
it was
than
more of a dialectic,
right? Yeah, rather than try to like how do you rhetorically like make people not want to agree with me, right? It's rather than like a rhetorical war, we were actually trying to understand each other so that we could move forward, right? And that was like that was the best debate I'd ever done. And it was interesting to see a lot of there were Christians in the audience who didn't like it because they wanted to see mixed martial arts. They wanted to see MMA
like
battle.
Some people do want
that guy should have
WWE
crushed Richard Carrier. Yeah. Why is he being nice to him?
Right.
And
but I can see the DDT. Come on.
But the point being is that we each, like, he understood atheism better. He understood the atheist position better that by the end of that day than ever before. And I understood where he was coming from better than I ever had before. I still didn't agree with him, obviously.
Right.
But the thing is that the audience saw that, and that gets the audience thinking like, oh, right. It sort of breaks down barriers of allowing yourself to question your own beliefs and worldviews, or allowing yourself to figure out like, oh, actually, maybe we can work with atheists on some things, and maybe like they do it makes sense from their point of view, even though I disagree with them. Like there's that kind of thing. And I think we've lost that because of this sort of moral panic on both sides. I have to say, like the anti-feminists have this huge anti-PC moral panic thing. That's like the way they reacted to Atheism Plus, I think was like completely irrational and over the top. But that's exactly the same thing that feminists are now doing, or like the extreme side of feminism are doing the exact same thing the anti-feminists did, using the same tactics like harassment, calling in threats and like
doxing,
all of the same stuff. And then the punishing anyone who even dares talk to try and understand the differences and why they hold those differences.
So if one person is being accused of, let's say, sexual harassment, the friends of that person or people that surround that person must come out against that person, or they're just as bad, right? Kind of.
Well, that's more complicated because that depends on issues of evidence and things like that. And no, I'm thinking more like what you did with the last conference is you wanted to have this dialogue. Now, it turned out badly because I think, Thomas Smith fumbled the ball on that. And he came in too emotional and didn't really.
It's very generous of you.
Achieve the goal of what should have happened on that stage, right? Now, Sargon takes some of the blame for that too, because he led a little bit of that.
And Sargon admitted that. Sargon did say, "I wish I, held back on some of the things."
Right, and goading.
He kind of went into takedown mode because
that's
when you're getting attacked, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that went badly. It shouldn't have gone that way. Like they should have been willing to do like I and Mike Licona did, something more like that. But well, now you distracted me with that, so I have no idea what I was talking about.
We put them in cages next time.
No, here we go. Yeah, that's the thing. So what will happen is that people say I'm fine with someone saying like, well, I just don't like what you're doing. I'm going to boycott you. I'm not going to go. And I'm going to blog. I'm going to ask people to boycott you and things like that. But when they start using coercion to get other people to boycott you, so instead say like, I'm gonna do this, but this other person over here is not boycotting you, so I'm gonna ruin their life. I'm gonna like get them fired. I'm gonna like shun them. I'm gonna exclude them from everything. I'm gonna punish them until they agree with me and also boycott the thing.
Correct.
Right. This is kind of like if you don't pay Paulie for protection. Watch out,
Well,
right? You
well,
know,
just-
the mobster mentality.
And you and I were talking about this earlier. Just think if this was voting for candidates and we acted this way, and you say like, well, if you vote for Trump, I'm going to get you fired. I'm going to ruin your job. I'm never going to talk to you again. If that's the way you're running a democracy, you are actually violating the consent of that other person.
Yeah.
You're
It's also
actually,
illegal
you are
for
using,
pollsters to
well,
do
yeah, you are using coercion to get someone to behave a certain way that you want them to behave, to even like vote in a certain way.
Right.
And
Well,
so-
this was intimidation from the KKK was because blacks were allowed to vote for the first time, and they couldn't win the legal battle. It was just intimidate to make sure they don't come to the polls.
Yeah. So that's where I think that they've turned against themselves. They're basically engaging in mass consent violation by basically coercing people to behave a certain way.
That's interesting. So you
rather
said
than-
consent, and you talked about this last
Yeah.
night. So break that down. That you're saying like being unable to debate in a rational way is a violation of consent. And like I'll say hi to Brittany Simon, who talks about consent and on her channel a lot, and I think has a lot of good things to say. But go ahead.
Well, no, you distracted me again, so I lost my train of thought
So
on that. But
how does
that's not
the
what he's
inability
saying.
though?
What
that's not really what I'm talking
Okay,
about.
that's
No.
not what
so
he's saying.
then
What I'm talking
I
about
had a
is-
few beers, so break it down
Yeah.
the right way.
No, individuals should have the autonomy to vote however they want.
Correct.
They should be able to vote their conscience and not be punished for it, not be coerced for how they vote. Because you can't have a free
Not by the
democracy, you
state,
can't have
but okay,
freedom.
obvers not by the state, but not by others.
No, but what he's
Even by
saying,
others,
yeah,
yeah.
what he's saying is like in the case of Seth Andrews, he should have been welcome to show up to Mythcon and not have been forced to drop out because of this social peer pressure. That's
Well, it wasn't just social peer pressure. I mean, it was actual like
you're right.
threats to like get his income sources destroyed, and like it was really like scary shit
It was,
essentially. And
yeah.
if the other side had done that to us, we would be up in arms about it. And I just don't understand how the people who are acting like this don't see that they've become the villain when they do that.
And that's Seth Andrews'
it's just like it's just like, well, I mean, there's I won't name names, but there were other like anti-feminists who've engaged campaigns of coercion and harassment like this to try and force people to vote a certain way. And the feminists back then, and I'm a feminist too, we all criticize that rightly, like that's you can't have a civil society and behave like that.
Right.
And now we have feminist extremists within the atheist movement that are doing exactly the same thing, disregarding individual autonomy and trying to punish people to force them to vote their way. And and that's different from just themselves
or at
saying,
least
I'm
shut
not
up, right?
well, or that, but it's different from like saying I myself am not going to go and I'm going to give a persuasive
reason
argument.
why. Yeah.
Right. I'll give a persuasive argument.
Yeah.
If you agree with me, also don't go or whatever.
Yes.
But
Not coming after your
that's-
job.
Right. Yeah. It's attacking the third party is the thing that makes no sense. Right. So that has me very disturbed. And the opposite thing we should be doing is trying to understand. And I dealt with this, like, arguing with some people like Winters, for example, where I'm trying to explain to her, especially because she goes through all of the sort of Nazi alt-right stuff about Sargon. I was like, okay, like there's a lot of valid criticisms you can make about Sargon and his ideology and his political positions and things, but he's not alt-right. Actually, he's actually kind of, he might, alt-right might like him in some respects, but he actually criticizes and makes fun of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Constantly,
So, and I'm trying to explain to her, like you've got his ideology wrong. If you really want to argue against him and want to argue against his ideas, if you want to win in the marketplace of ideas, you have to actually correctly, accurately understand why he holds the views he does and what views he actually holds. Because otherwise, everyone you're trying to persuade, like you're trying to say, like all these people who like and follow Sargon, you want to persuade them to say, hey, actually, you shouldn't agree with what he's saying. If you want to persuade these people, you have to actually be correct about what you're saying.
You're giving them every reason to just say fake news.
Because otherwise, otherwise they're seeing like, you don't even know what the hell you're talking about. Why should I listen to you? So if you want to win the culture war, you have to actually understand the people that you're arguing against and the people you think have the wrong ideas for society. And that requires you to like pay attention to them, take them seriously, listen to them. Even if you're just appalled by the things they say, you still have to do that so that you understand it, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes you might not be able to understand it from the available data, and you have to ask them questions and see, like, are they going to like honestly answer? Am I going to find out, is this thing I don't understand about their point of view or why they hold it? Will they answer it? Will they give me a decent answer? You've got to engage.
Yeah.
And then the argument then has to be like, if they deviate from civil discourse, rather than saying, oh, you're evil, I'm never going to talk to you again, you just point out, look, you're deviating from civil discourse.
Yeah.
Let's not do that. Let's agree not to do that.
Yeah.
And so that you always bring it back to conversation and attempts to mutual understand.
Well, and the worst thing, like, that makes it even worse if this is happening in the atheist community is I think we should know by now that we have to understand scripture before we can criticize it. We have to understand.
Oh yeah, that's a good analogy.
What religion is before we can actually honestly start, poking holes in it. And you're exactly right. If you're not doing that, all you're doing is you're getting this weird zealot minority of people all worked up over lies and, completely slanderous comments in a lot of cases. And when people actually, the logical people go to check it out, that's not what he's saying at all. So obviously your point is moot.
Yeah, I mean, to give you a good example, I mean, there are a lot of atheists that make really bad arguments against Christianity and against theism, and those people are a problem because you want to no, you've got it wrong. You really need to understand what you're criticizing. An example is when atheists go charge into like a Christian forum and say, well, Constantine chose the canon of the Bible, and they're like, and all the Christians there know that's not true.
That's not
and
true.
So immediately, no, you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Therefore, your atheism is clearly founded on ignorance, and now they have now they can ignore everything he says.
Correct.
Whoever is making that argument. So obviously, you have to really have nuanced understanding of Christianity and Christian history if you're going to criticize it. We know that. We've learned that. Like atheists, that's one of the few things atheists were willing to criticize each other over. A little bit. They even would get angry when someone like Ed Brayton he had that series where he says bad atheist arguments.
Yes.
Some people gave him shit for that. That's an example of this. Like, actually, what he's saying is helpful. Why don't you listen to him?
Correct.
But the same thing is being done in the political and value sphere.
Correct.
And that's not productive, and it's not going to help.
And
you are going to fail to persuade people
Correct.
to adopt your point of view. And isn't that what you want? Is for people to adopt your point of view? Like
Exactly.
what else? What is the point?
Unless you
Or at
believe
least
the
move
marketplace
a
of
little.
ideas has failed, and I've seen that put forward a number of times. And in that case, well, we have to win, and sometimes by any means necessary.
Yeah, well, it's even funnier too because there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes on in this virtue signaling, if you will. There's a lot of people on the left that have criticized us that have then gone on and interviewed with Sargon or whatever. And I'll just tell a little story with Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty was a big critic of the last Mythcon, and one of the criticisms he had against us was, all they're going for is controversy. They put Trump in the title of the debate that he was in. He's the one that actually told us to put Trump in the debate of the title that he was in. So that was really hypocritical. But also, like when he was leaving, I shook his hand goodbye, and Fritz went and took him to get on the plane. And on his way out, my wife, Dima's wife, and one of their friends they were helping. They don't care about any of this stuff, but they were helping us do registration. And so there's 3 women sitting at registration. On his way out, he's walking down the street and he starts yelling at my wife, Dima's wife, and their friend, how they should be ashamed of themselves. Like literally at the top of his lungs, yelling at them. He didn't say anything to me, but he's yelling at them how they should be ashamed of themselves for being a part of this event. Now, fast forward another 8 months or whatever, he's all of a sudden on stage with Jordan Peterson. He's on stage with Douglas Murray. Charles Murray, I think, is coming up.
I don't know if Charles Murray is coming up, but Douglas Murray, look at
which
Google Douglas Murray and controversial. It comes up, but like
I applaud him for that.
Yes.
I think that's brilliant. That's innovating. That's an atheist going out there and sharing
He should be talking to them.
viewpoints and challenging them on certain topics and stuff. That's a brilliant thing to do. But how hypocritical is that to,
he can do it, but we can't.
Right. And it just
and if you don't like it, yell at us.
I just pulled the Matt Dillahunty example, but there's a lot
door.
of these examples where it's just hypocrisy all over the place with tactics they use, or with the way they slander people, or the way they lie, just essentially straight up lie about other people. And that's another problem in this community, I think, that we're faced with. And I don't know if you have anything.
Well, it's very much like the ends justify the means attitude, which is, and it is all coercive. It's all like varying, like using whatever form of force they actually have access to try and make things happen. Like when they, did the security threats against you last time. That to me is fascistic. I mean, if you're using force and coercion to get people to align with you, that is fascism by definition. So you can't say, "Oh, I'm the anti-fascist," but you're actually the one using fascist tactics. Yeah. I mean, sorry, you look around, you're the fascist in the room once that's happened. And so that really disturbs me that I see this happening, especially, because I am a feminist and I actually support social justice and a lot of the concepts that go through that. So to see my own people behaving like the villains that we've been fighting all of these years has me very distraught. And bothered.
Yeah. What I'm really concerned as to the why of this, right? This has been building for a while. They called it Elevator Gate, where the first of this was splitting apart. But I didn't even notice it when I came into like my very first conference in like 2014. Right, this is 3 years after the supposed feminist split. But to me, I want to know why. Like, I care less about the history, but why are people acting this way? And I was reading something today that put forward this. They said, well, it's an overreaction to Nazism, and that like the events of the Holocaust and the Nazi regime are horrible, but we so fear them, we so worry about going down that path that we've created this extremist movement. In the same way that you could be very extreme on terrorism and say terrorism is my #1 problem, and you can lead to the xenophobia, turning inward, bigotry. And if you get so hardcore on terrorism, you can actually hurt yourself. And I think it's the same way on Nazism, and that's what they were put forward. What do you think about that?
I don't know about that. Pro or con, I'm not sure of that hypothesis, and I don't have any particular thoughts on that. What the most that I see, like and I don't actually know the answer. Like I'm curious about this too. But what I've seen is that because we have such a polarized society, both sides are actually largely disempowered, but perceive the other side as too powerful, even though it's not true. And so we have basically two minorities that aren't in control of the direction of the culture.
Yeah.
And that creates this sort of moral panic that, that you have to go to more extreme measures. It's similar to what Fareed Zakaria said about what caused Al-Qaeda.
This was actually a CNN commentator, right?
Yeah, it was actually the things that he was saying were causing groups and movements, causing terrorism in the Islamic movement was actually the increase in progressivism in Islam. And now that means relative to the extremism.
Yes.
But the point being is that the Muslim extremists were actually shrinking and losing. Like, they weren't controlling the governments they wanted to control. They weren't controlling the populations. The women weren't behaving the way that they wanted to behave. So, and they weren't listening. So they would say like, well, you're a bad Muslim, and no one was listening. So what do? They get more and more violent, and because that's the only thing that gets them attention, the only thing that seems to work. And so they get more and more extreme and radicalized, and it's a reaction to their losing. In effect,
yeah.
Right?
When you say like the radical Mormons that practice polygamy and so on and so forth, they're kind of like they could view it as a watering down of Mormonism when they reject polygamy. And this is 100 and some years ago, right? And look at it how it becomes extraordinarily insular. And I think radical Islam is much the same way.
Yeah,
very insular.
I think there's a lot of this moral panic on both sides, that they feel like they're powerless and therefore have to resort to any tools they can and any kind of extremist action that they can to get the things they want, and aren't stepping back and realizing that they're actually becoming the villains that they think that they're
right.
that they're
No, but you
attacking.
do see, I go across Catholic forums, and you know how conservative or liberal this forum is when you see some people that are like, yeah, I don't even think Vatican II is a good idea. And I'm like, wow, okay, we're on a very conservative side here. Right? Like, but yet resorting to violence. I mean, that's one thing to be like, yeah, I think Vatican II is terrible, and you really are. That's it's pretty regressive. But it's another thing to go to full on violence.
Oh, well, sure. Or any other form
or
of coercion.
coercion. Yeah.
Like we have, that Catholic Defense League or whatever it is, that it's supposedly one guy in a bedroom somewhere. That
I have no idea.
Bill Donahue.
This sounds amazing.
Is that it?
Yeah. Like Bill Donahue. He call him the Catholic Bulldog. Right?
Yeah. Tries to get boycotts and things like that energized to like defend Catholicism and stuff.
Like back to the 50s almost. Like
right.
Devil narrative.
Yeah, I just don't approve of those coercive tactics.
Yeah.
But not that I don't approve of like choosing to boycott things, but it has to be through an act of, it has to be your own choice, and for other people it has to be through persuasion. You have to persuade them. You have to convince them that it's something they want to do through reason and argument, and not through threats.
Right.
Basically.
Well, and that was the funny thing about Mythcon last year. It was the biggest conference as far as attendees goes in America, in this world. And it was one of those things like, yes, if we would have had no one show up, then obviously you vote with your wallet. As organizers, we know, okay, we need to try something different.
That's right. Yeah.
Or, but that wasn't the case. It was actually, you were there. Everyone had a good time. There was a lot of like really like younger people, which was interesting because if you
Yeah.
go to American Atheist,
There's a lot of aging in the
convention,
movement.
yeah, there's like a lot of like legacy people. Like there's nothing. I'm not being
Well,
ageist. I'm
but-
just
but
No,
you're
but
trying to
it's
be in
similar.
touch.
It's similar to
Right.
what's happening to churches, right? They're aging
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Like the youth
Yeah.
are just leaving in droves. They're just hemorrhaging youth.
correct. Yeah.
And the atheism movement has been doing that as well.
Yes.
There was a flash in a moment where they were getting younger people excited again. And that was, like you said, the golden age of atheism, when you had the first burst of like Harris and Dawkins.
Yeah.
When people are like, yeah, we can be out as atheists,
Yes.
and so on. But that battle hasn't been completely won, but they've made so much progress, like you said, that it's not, there's not the swell of need for it in the way that it had been, or at least not the sense of it.
Well, it's even funnier to me because like some of the conversations we had is you actually know a lot of the inside baseball. You know the organizers, you know the people that control a lot of the bigger organizations, and there just seems to be this refusal to innovate, to think outside the
Oh
box.
yeah, I've noticed that quite broadly. Yeah. I can't make specific
Of
examples,
course,
but it's all I don't want to embarrass anyone.
yeah, it's speculative.
But the reality is, no, I mean, I have I have a lot of firsthand knowledge of a lot of these examples of that's exactly what people have been telling organization after organization after organization. You need to innovate. Here are and they'll even ask them like, look, we're losing money, we're losing people. What do we do? And then they'll hire someone or ask someone to give them advice. They'll give them the advice. Say, oh, we're not going to do any of those things.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, well, then what?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's like you said, they're unwilling to like.
But are they?
innovate.
But why are they unwilling? Like in some cases, they'll say,
There's
"Well, we want to
probably
do this.
multiple
We want to
reasons.
do this." And this is where I sometimes see this as a religious argument. They'll say, "Well, we want to do this," and they're like, "Well, that's your white privilege talking. That's your male privilege talking, or something." And so that can be used to knock down any argument.
That's not what I've encountered. What
they'll
I've
say
seen happen.
we need to attract more minorities. Like atheism.
Yeah,
is
but then
too
they
many
don't.
white guys.
But then they don't do anything that would actually do that.
Right.
That's the other thing. Is like they'll talk that talk, but they won't actually do anything.
But don't we automatically then, if we want to attract minorities and women, don't we automatically stereotype both of those things? And
No, not at all. Because
what are women?
So here's an example. Like you have the Black atheist movement is also going on, and that's kind of like they're at the same place that we were many years ago, because being out as a Black atheist in the Black community was a lot hard. It's still hard now.
It's harder. Yeah.
So that's still a big issue. But if you're going to go to, you can say, let's go listen to what struggles Black atheists are putting up with, what they want to hear at conferences, what they want to talk about at conferences. They're going to give you a very different list of things.
Yes.
And you got to say, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Come talk about that. Like some people tried doing that. But it just didn't keep up the momentum of doing that. You actually have to say, and what's going to come up, it's going to be political stuff. Yeah. Right. So there's going to be politics in there. And so you can't just say, it's only the churches that are the problem. No, like the things that Black people are dealing with are a lot of political stuff. There are a lot of racist stuff, a lot of both cultural, and not just like KKK racism. I mean, like institutional kind of unconscious bias and other problems that they're dealing with. That's what they want to talk about. And that's what they want us to be aware of. You got to be willing to listen to that.
Well, and I think too, so we're talking a lot about events, but I think it goes beyond just events too. It's just like an organization, no matter what organization it is, you have to find a way to engage your audience. And corporations and nonprofits have to do this constantly. You constantly have to innovate. You constantly have to shift. And what I've seen in atheism is there's just this weird like taboo against trying to do something different. Let's try this instead of that, or let's talk to this person. And it's this weird, I don't know if you want to call it tribalism, but there's also this mentality of
what I've always seen most of the cases that I'm familiar with. It's the old guard.
That's
can only think in one way.
The good old boys.
Not only boys,
right.
It is that. But they have the
he's using you guys. All gender.
Right.
Yeah.
They have the control and the money.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's also people behind the scenes who are the donors, the big donors who have a lot of the money. They're the ones who say, no, I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, then you're going to end up aging out the organization or the movement. But you need the big donors, right? Who are willing to do what you're talking about. They innovate. Like they've got to put big money up to make this happen. And it's the problem of finding that. And if you find the big donors that have that mindset, they're probably putting their money into other things. And so it's difficult to convince them to like say, well, here's what the atheist community has to offer.
Yeah.
and convince them of that.
Well,
I think that,
and then you have the control of the organizations is largely in the past generation, basically.
But
so
it's a failing business plan. Who's going to?
But it's more than that. They're like when it's great to be inclusive and to reach out, but at the same time, you cannot alienate your base when you do it. And I think there was a lot of people that felt alienated. If there was one line of politics allowed at said conference, it's not allowed to be challenged. Well, you're not going to go.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's different from having someone come and speak on a subject and saying we're not going to listen to any other point of view. That's those are different things altogether.
Right.
So I think it's possible to have different points of view and try to like say, let's engage with this and like, what are you afraid of to both sides? Like, what actually
that's the way to do it.
And that's, that's how you make progress, is like get at the emotional reaction to people. It's like, why are you bothered by this? Why do you care? That's the other thing. It's like the whole issue of trans rights, restroom access and things like that. But you can argue with someone about the science or facts of transgenderism, but really you should not get to all that. You should start right away to someone who's against trans rights in restroom access and say, why do you even care?
Right.
Let's start with why you care. Because that's what's really the problem. Like that's your motivation. We got to go right at that. Let's skip all of this rhetoric that's your construction of your rationalizations for your point of view. People focus on that sort of factual debates and don't go right at let's actually get at why do you even care? And then of course they'll start, they have their defense shields will go up, they'll give you like a lot of these excuses. Well, I think because this will happen, and go, do you really think that's really what's going to happen? And then you can like really get them to self-explore.
We have a trans panel. You're talking to Sargon at Mythcon, but we do have a trans panel where Blair White and Theron Meyer and Angel Bonilla are going to be on there. Like, what in your opinion?
You have a lot. Actually, your conference has a lot of interesting topics with well-balanced panels.
Thank you.
Both sides are represented, covering a lot of different issues. It's exactly the kind of conference we've really needed for a long time, but people have been avoiding or just not thinking to do.
Well, that's
and I know, well, thank you, but you deserve it, because this time I thought like the last conference, you didn't get the balance quite right on that last conference. But I think a lot of that was because of the
it also sucks. Seth dropped out. We had given him,
exactly.
So we lost.
You would have had more balance had there not been all that coercive.
Yeah, we gave
shit
Seth Andrews an open mic.
Yeah. That's
so it's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's where the feminists really shot themselves in the foot on that one. And it's the same. You run into this where they say, well, you should have more feminists. And then when we ask a feminist, they go threaten to ruin that feminist job if they go there. It's like, do you see the contradiction in your behavior?
Right.
You're defeating your own goals.
We're going to call those that are left leaning to bail out of the conference. Right. You're creating
and
your
then
own problem,
complain that it's not balanced.
Right.
It's like
no.
You can't.
So no, that's the thing that kind of really frustrates the shit out of me.
Yeah.
But see, you learned that from that, and for this next conference, you did a really good job. You know what? We're going to make this more diverse, and we're going to really lock it down and make sure that it holds up that way. So like this next conference is kind of like the crystallization of what I think you were trying to achieve in the last conference.
Well, what do you want to see
and
come
even
out
goes
of the
beyond
panels?
it, really.
Like on the trans panel specifically, like what topics would you hope that they're engaging with? What
Actually, I want them to tell me what I want to see what topics they come up with. That's the whole point, right? Is I want to go see what are their concerns and how do they how does their dispute operate?
Right.
And so I can be aware of what are the disputes in the trans community, and what perspective can atheists bring to that?
That's a good point.
And how can atheists be better educated on that, rather than only hearing one side and being completely unprepared for the rhetoric of the other side.
Yeah.
And so
because then that gives you a chance to argue it. You're like, well, on the other hand, right? I mean, Harry Truman always said he wanted one-handed economists.
Yeah, on all that stuff. So you've got like a Black Lives Matter kind of panel thing going too. And so that's another example of that, where rather than just going to your echo chamber and hearing what they say, let's see what actually comes up. Yeah. And what are the issues?
And do you think like it's actually more important where they agree as opposed to where they disagree?
They're both equally important. We need to understand the disagreement. We need to understand why. And it's also valuable to know where the agreements are.
Because that seems to be the common ground of which, okay, these are the things we agree. Now, instead of we're looking at each other as the enemy, and you want to look at each other as the loyal opposition. Like if we agree that climate change is a problem, and you say we need to do ABC, and I'm like, no, climate change is a problem. We do X, Y, Z. We're the loyal opposition, as opposed to the enemy, right?
Not entirely, right?
We both say it's a problem.
Yeah, but
as opposed to if I deny the problem.
You have to realize that contrary ideas are a barrier to progress, right? So if you're, let's say the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, people who say shit like, you know, the All Lives Matter movement or the Blue Lives Matter movement, and use those things to sort of like erase or belittle the actual concerns that started this, or even like rhetorically claim that, well, how dare you say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter? And it's like, as if that's ever what they were saying, that all lives didn't matter. Of course, all lives matter. That's actually what Black Lives Matter means. They're saying, actually, if all lives matter, you got to include us, right? That was the whole point. But rather than go to that rhetoric and leave it at that, like, let's confront this, right? Let's like,
it was almost like the slogan, if it had been Black Lives Also Matter, would almost,
which is
like,
terrible. Terrible.
But no, it gets the point across.
No, but I mean,
it implies they don't, but it doesn't imply that yours life doesn't.
But just in terms of Machiavellian marketing savvy, that's a shitty line.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not in marketing.
It's super clunky. Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. That's the other thing, is like memes don't work if they're too complicated. If they're complicated and clunky, they're not a meme anymore.
I put in one word.
Yeah, no, but that was enough to make it an issue. No, I'm serious. Like the way you get people excited is you got to have a simple slogan that really punches.
That's true.
And then what's
real quick,
supposed
Lonnie
to happen,
Wines, who gave us like our super chat, mentioned that like Christopher Hitchens sort of got this all started and really opened up the door. I agree. I love Christopher Hitchens. We miss him, and I don't think there's going to be.
Yeah, but Madeline Murray O'Hare came before.
Yeah, but Hitchens was hard to hate.
Sorry, yeah, we got way off topic on that.
Yeah,
but no, I was just throwing that in there.
Well, what's supposed to happen is you got the punchy line, you get people excited, you've got an energized movement, Black Lives Matter, and then what's supposed to happen is that everyone's supposed to say, well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yes.
And then hear them out, rather than just immediately say, oh, how dare you say our lives don't matter? It's like, that's not the fuck they're saying.
Yeah.
Right. But that's that racist defensism. It's like, how dare you accuse me of being part of the problem? And this gets to what I was saying there, is that part of the problem is the fact that we aren't doing enough to actually deal with these issues. The mere fact that we're ignoring them as a problem is allowing the problem to persist. So if you have certain ideas that get in the way of them making changes that can make positive improvement in society, you are the enemy. Well, but it doesn't mean that you're. You are, but it doesn't mean that you're. You should be dehumanized.
We were talking about racism, right? And that this was an article where they were talking to Indian Americans, right, from Delhi and so on and so forth. And said, well, how do you feel? Like, don't you feel discriminated by your race? And they said, well, actually, no. In America, sometimes you get a weird look, but I don't, because he goes, what in India it was the caste system. The caste system was so oppressive. And they turned and said, but don't you think race? And they're like, no, it's the caste system. And they kept going back and forth to the point where he said, you know what? Maybe you're part of the problem to the Indian American, right? Do you think that this kind of ideologism is so bad that you're going to hurt yourself? I mean, if you can't pull back from your position,
only when it goes that far.
That's what I mean. Is that's the enemy? That's not loyal opposition.
But that's the thing, is loyal opposition is not enough. It's not like being a devil's advocate or something. You really do need to persuade people to make positive change. And if they are resistant to, or not only resistant, but if they're spreading lies or misinformation that's getting in the way of the positive change, they are your enemy. And it doesn't. It doesn't mean. Hold on. It doesn't mean that you should dehumanize them. It doesn't mean that they're someone you got to kill. It's not that kind of enemy.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of enemy that you run into when you're trying to promote abortion rights, and then got a congressman who's pro-life. They are your enemy, but it doesn't mean that you have to dehumanize them or not treat them as.
I guess I just don't like the word enemy then.
Adversary. Well, and I will say this: Marissa Janae Johnson and Derek Blackman are going to have a fantastic conversation about this. But where you're going to be with Sargon now. For us, this is the highlight of the event. It's the one it's a closer. It's the one at the end of the night. People are gonna have a lot of beers in them probably by that point.
Oh boy!
But no, there's a lot of excitement around this, as a lot of the panels. But there's after seeing what happened with Sargon last year, I think there's a lot of people that want to see him, even his own fans, want to see him get challenged. And that was one of the biggest criticisms, is that Thomas Smith just could not challenge him. And
no, he did not effectively do that.
It didn't do it, dropped the ball, acted like a child, whatever you want to say. So like this year with you up there, these are two individuals that we have the utmost respect for, you and Sargon, and we know you guys disagree. And I think it'll be a conversation where we can learn a lot, where we can say, where is Sargon's position, the libertarian position? Where is I'll call it sane progressive position, and what do you guys agree on, what do you guys disagree on? And what are you looking
Find the
forward to
strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. So like, what are you? Let's give a little preview. I know a lot of people are like really watching this now, thinking like, what's going to happen? Like, without going too much in.
Without going all Bill Belichick and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
looking at your
Yes,
playbook.
yeah.
See the X's and O's.
I mean, I haven't fully decided yet. I'm mulling about this because the clock time is not a lot. So there's not a lot. I'm not going to be able to hit every point everybody's going to want me to hit.
Okay.
So the people need to prepare for that. Like I'm going to have to choose my areas of discussion, and they're not going to be many because there's not going to be room for that many.
Sure.
And for me, what I'm looking at mostly is like you can dispute the veneer of like his behaviors and his ideas, but I think those are all sort of the effluence of his methods of how does he come to these conclusions, not just like about the facts, but also about what he thinks is appropriate to do. And I want to get at that. Like, does that methodology work? Are there flaws in that methodology? And I want people to like think critically about that aspect of Sargon and what he does. And so I probably will be going in that direction.
Okay.
That will probably dissatisfy some people, but I think it's the more important conversation because it underlies everything else.
Yeah.
And it's not that the other stuff isn't important and that we shouldn't discuss that too.
Right.
It's just I'm not going to have time to discuss every little thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And there's an after party where you guys will be talking. You know, there'll be other opportunities. Who knows? Maybe we do it again. And
well, it could even spawn like future dialogues.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
So
Yeah, exactly.
that go into specific things. I'd be
Yeah.
interested in that, for example. Like
So-
you could pick specific complaints that people have against Sargon and say, look, let's hash this out. And you know, I'm not like a fawning Sargon fan, so,
Right.
but I can have a civil conversation with him and
Yeah.
say, like, this is what everybody's concerns are about what you did, let's say.
Yeah.
And then so like, you know, what and you know, he can make his case and we can have this sort of back and forth about
Yep.
it.
Yeah,
We
we
can
can
do
get the
that.
dialectic.
We could do
going.
that issue by issue, but it would have to be like episode by episode by episode. Like,
Yeah.
it would have to be, you know, piecemeal on.
One of the things that's coming up for sure is identity politics, right? Like, is identity politics always a bad thing? Whether it's played
Well,
by the left, which is definitely,
the
I mean, you can't
reality
argue
is-
that it's not. And
The
if it's
reality
played by
is
the
that
right-
all politics is identity politics.
Is it?
Yeah.
Always?
Oh yeah. Always is. Whether you are stating your identity or not, you're always voting for. You're always creating alliances or voting for or against some alliance.
So what is he to what does identity politics mean to Sargon then?
Well, that I don't know if that matters so much for the.
But
for the discussion.
what the people I think they're talking about virulent identity politics that even
Yeah.
debating this idea will take away my humanity, my
Well, see,
identity.
But see, here's the first thing is like, if that comes up, I want to get immediately away from that abstraction because abstraction is divorced from reality. You got to go give me a specific, actual, factual example of what you're talking about. And then first of all, let's make sure your facts are right. Often they're not. And then once we've got the facts right, we say, okay, let's look at that specific example because I can only respond to actual real world things and not like these abstractions we fabricate out of what we think.
Well,
is
I could
going
give you
on.
an example. If someone had said, okay, well, there are only two genders. There's male and
Wait,
female, and
not-
you were a trans
you-
woman, you are denying, you
you're-
could say that.
But see, you just made that up. Like you're constructing that. You're not citing a specific person who's making a specific statement. See the difference? It's like you've created this person in your
Well, no,
head.
she went ahead, created one of her most highly viewed videos. It says,
Mhm.
how many genders? 2. Right now, she
Right.
actually delisted the
Okay,
video.
there you go. That's a good
But-
example.
Mhm.
Because now we can go look at her video and we could look at the videos she did the follow up on that, right?
Mhm.
And we can see the story arc of that, where that went. And that's much more productive. If someone goes to like Shu and Head's video and just looks at that one video and says, "Oh," and then like slags her off and says she's awful and doesn't look at what the storyline that
That's
happened
fair.
after that, you see what I mean? Like if you look at the specific
You
example,
cannot look at a snapshot and say, I know all of history because
Yeah.
I saw one
well,
picture.
and it's even worse if you just create this generic person in your head rather than talk about a specific example. Because notice, once we picked a specific example, now there's all this context that you
Yeah.
can point to that completely changes how
That's
you
a-
see
that's a
what's
good
going
point.
on.
And I think that's where you guys are going to have a brilliant conversation because you have so many examples. Sargon's been covering this for years. He has a lot of examples. I think there's going to be a lot that comes out of this. And
I hope so. I mean, I
just on different
in the
topics,
the last
obviously.
conference, I thought Sargon behaved rather badly. Like he was
Yeah.
uncivil and didn't seem like he was interested in pulling it towards a civil conversation. He, it's like, for example, I deal with this all the time with
Yeah.
Christian debaters that are just complete assholes and liars on the podium. And I do my best to try and like, let's get rid of that stupid rhetoric and
Yeah.
get down to what we're actually here to talk about.
Yeah.
to me, that's the way I would have expected Sargon to behave.
Right.
Would have
Although
hoped,
it was
would have
already
hoped
off the
to be
rails,
good.
right? At
Yeah.
some point, you
No,
can't stop the
but-
truck.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
Yeah,
That's why they have those
and I think,
runaway.
like you said, Sargon kind of like saw that too.
He
like,
saw that,
sort
and
of-
he actually admitted that to me. He's like, I wish I would have in some cases pulled back. And this is one of the weird criticisms about Sargon and Shu and Armored and all the YouTubers. We had Kat Black made this criticism where she said, these people are terrible public speakers. They're terrible. It's like, if they don't get the opportunity, how can they get any better? And I think, with Sargon going through that experience, I think he learned a lot from that, just like you've learned a lot from your debates over time. And that's how you hone a craft, and you can't get any better at it if you're not actually doing it. And I think Sargon has learned mistakes. I hope Thomas has learned from his mistakes, but I don't know.
Well,
he seems very resistant.
He seems very resistant, and his social media behavior is even more bizarre. But I think Sargon is a logical person that did take a lot away from that, and I think this is going to be different, just because he knows your experience, and there's not going to be this haymaker with coming out and having to defend a tweet that shouldn't have.
But this brings it up, and Bunty King's in the chat too.
Even that, I think there could have been a whole conversation about just that could have gone better.
A different way.
Yeah,
it could have been. But so it brings up like a question that I often ask, and Bunty King's in the audience, right, or in the chat. He was punished Bunty King because he booted off Twitter for like seemingly the silliest things. And and Bunty, I think, does, in my opinion, like a really good job of trying to be nice, trying to be fair, try to listen, right? But do we need to be nicer to each other on social media? Because like social media is this thing that's hit us by storm. Like the printing press, it's revolutionized a lot of things. Like, we don't know how to handle it right now. Like, what are your thoughts on social media? Should we tone it down a bit? Like,
I mean,
it's free space. I don't know.
Sorry,
that's God saying.
That's actually
Carrier,
Sargon.
your numbers up.
That's Sargon saying, "Great chat."
Okay.
Hey, Sargon, and he thinks it's funny right now because it's making a noise.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. You just
Hey,
asked me a
Sargon.
question.
So yeah, social media is new, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is part of this because of the vitriol and social media?
I think
do we need to be nicer? What do we need to do with this?
There's so many things in this whole divide that's going on in our culture and in our movement. The people just need to listen to Aristotle. Is that you need to find the correct mean. It's the balance in between, rather than going to either extreme, right? So like Aristotle, just every virtue has its corresponding vice.
Yes. Yeah,
if you take a virtue too far, it becomes bad. If you don't take it far enough, it's bad. You got to find the correct mean in between. And I think the same thing with media. So like there are a lot of people who like, that's the problem with social media, especially like texting, tweeting and stuff, is it's flat affect. And one of the things I often say is like, on the internet, everyone is autistic. Right, because no one can read the emotion of what's going on.
It's very true,
and they
even with
import
really good emojis.
You're reading with your own bias,
exactly, and so
I'm in a good mood, so I'm reading this in a
right. They'll overread what something is written. Like you might just say something plain of fact, and you weren't even thinking any emotionally about it at all.
Yeah,
and they take it as like this grave insult, like
because
how dare
they're
you?
mad at you for some reason.
Right,
they're like, oh, that he said have a nice day.
We need to, and that's the thing where you need to understand that's going on. Is like well, you actually don't quite know. You're trying to model in your head what emotion they were feeling when they wrote the thing, but you're gonna be wrong a lot. And you gotta understand that, like, actually and even then, like, it's sort of fundamental even within feminism is like, ask, like don't just assume, like ask. So if you want to have that conversation, say like, well, what did you mean by that? Or that seemed kind of like rude. What's your goal on that? So those conversations need to be possible. There still has to be the ability to criticize, right? So and even ridicule in some cases is warranted. I think the ridiculous deserves to be ridiculed, but there are people who ridicule things that aren't ridiculous.
Yeah,
so that's the thing, is like figuring out where that balance is, when it is appropriate and when it isn't. It requires maturity. Yeah, and
we're always using the hammer, right? We're building a house with a single tool, right?
Right. You got to think about it. Like, you got to live the self-examined life and think like, is this really how I want to go about doing this? Is this the best way to do this? And people don't, like, they just shoot off and fire off and don't pause and think.
That's true.
And aren't willing to, like, actually, I was a little too harsh on you in that. And I've done that. Like, I've actually apologized for things like, I went too far on that. I was a little harsher on that. I shouldn't have done that. And I think people need to be not only willing to do that more often, but willing to respect that, so that it's worth doing and is encouraged that more people do it. You would create a better discourse on it.
But we can't force it. This is the thing. You must encourage it, right? But we can't. In the same way, we can't compel pronoun usage. And I agree with Jordan Peterson there. What if you had to compel adjectives, right? I want smart, good looking, and funny. Right, and you're not allowed to say anything other than my preferred adjectives.
We kind of already do that, though. Like there are certain things you can't say.
But I'm not allowed. But it's compelling speech, right? Like if I'm to pick my pronouns, why can't I pick my adjectives?
Well, that's like saying that you can call any of your students derogatory names because you just don't want to bother learning their actual name. Like, you know what I mean?
But I'm not saying what you can't say. I'm saying what you must say. What if I say that my adjectives are actually, you must refer to me in that way?
Yeah.
And this could make as an attempt to immune myself from criticism.
But this is the thing. We're getting into abstraction and ignoring the particulars of what really happened. There's a difference between making a law and making it a policy for contract violation for your employment contract. If a professor is profaning his students and he gets fired for it, that's not criticizable. It's like, yeah, okay, that shouldn't happen, right? So they do have the right to ask him to be respectful and treat the students respectfully, whatever that entails, right? And that includes, like, do you need to educate yourself better or whatever?
But does that include compelled speech, though?
Well, what do you mean by compelled?
Like the Ontario
Human Rights Code compelled speech, because you're saying
you had to, that he must refer, as opposed to just calling the person Brenda or Mark.
Exactly,
you must use
that's
these.
The same thing, though. Saying you must call your students by their actual name. That's the same thing, right? Rather than saying you can't use derogatory terms for your students. It's still a must. It's the same policy. It's just a question of how are you defining what respect will be. It'd be the same thing if you had a school where it says students will address professor as professor, right? And say, like, it's disrespectful to not do so. Now, I think that would be a little excessive in our modern society, but that's the same kind of thing, right? It's like, we want respectfulness to exist between student and teacher. Otherwise, you're not realizing the business model that we're existing. You're not doing your job.
But speaking of the business model, like, do you think that education wrongly so has turned into a customer-based model? Right, medicine, for example, should not be a customer-based model.
I agree.
I would like 40 OxyContin, please. Like, not the 10 that you gave.
No, but it still requires professionalism. There still has to be standards.
But it has turned into a customer-based model. This is where I think.
Yeah, but that's a separate problem. I agree that's a problem, but it's completely unrelated to this. Like, what we're talking about would exist regardless of that.
Okay.
Because you could look at any time in the history of, like, Oxford University and the kind of standards they have for what constitutes respectful behavior between professor and
I suppose. I mean, in a courtroom, you do have to say Your Honor or Judge, right?
Exactly.
I mean, so that would be one example.
It can be contempt of court.
But I mean, but it's like an email at work. Like,
that's another
the way
example.
I look at social media is like when you write an email to your boss who's all over you, and you want to say certain things, but you have to keep it at a high level and respectful, even though you want to say.
But there's a lot of ways to do it. But Your Honor and Judge is a good example of compelled speech that may not fit the.
But what's because I think the difference between, like, that scenario at work is because you have to see that person later. And a lot of cases with the social media thing, I'm off the Jordan Peterson thing now, but I'm talking more about the social media because I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
these people will say crazy shit online, and there's no way they're going to say that shit in person.
Yeah, that's another factor.
And that's, the funny thing is a lot of the critics would just take Mythcon again as the small sample. There's a lot of people that are saying a bunch of crazy shit online, but none of them showed up. I'd actually give them respect. I'd let them just stand in front of me and say half the crazy shit that they say online just to hear it. But it doesn't. When you're in person, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
So we have another super chat, right? No, this sort of fits in with the social media community. So we're gonna fire this one out, right?
This is exactly what I'm talking about.
This one may or may not sting. So this is to Ryan Long, and he said, Dr. Carrier helped his SJW pals lie about me. I'm a gay liberal. He said I'm everything wrong with atheism and skepticism. Apologize to me, you sack of.
Yeah. So
okay.
So this is again like this, because he's not here. If Ryan Long was sitting right there, his comment would be completely different than what was just there. Now, unless that's a joke, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But
that's right. You're right.
I honestly don't even know who that is.
But I think that's when we get into this world of politics and on social media, I think we need to take a step back and realize, like, you actually are talking to somebody, and, like, you would not want someone to talk like this to you in real life. Like, just tone it down. Like, this, Like
Well, I think people can
These
get
people
like
look
we've
insane.
communicated like with Facebook now. It used to just be in like our main feeds. Now there's random people.
Well,
in
also like notice
and
the
like
difference.
you've communicated with people. That you
I
probably
don't know if
remember.
that's the intent. This is a like an intentional thing, but like saying someone is everything wrong with atheism and skepticism is like.
But then what he's saying,
it's not an insult.
Said then, right?
Then he says sack of crap. Like that's you see, like that is offensive. The first thing is not.
Yeah.
Like to say,
but everything wrong. Like, but no one's ever everything. No one's 100% wrong.
Right.
But no, you should be allowed to say like, I think you're everything wrong with atheism and skepticism. That's a really polite criticism.
Is it?
Yeah. Compared to like you're a sack of crap. Well you see the difference?
But yeah, the everything wrong. But it does imply character judgment.
Yeah. And it may be a character judgment. We're allowed to issue character judgments.
Well, but sack of crap is just is one too. It's just a little bit.
But this is what we're talking about. You're talking about level of discourse. Look at the difference in level of discourse.
But I'm saying,
but the sting is the same. Though.
I agree 100%.
It's like
that's my
prison
point.
or a golden prison.
No, notice my point is like you're acting like those are the same. And that's the problem with social media.
I agree 100%. Yes, you should be able to say anything like that, anything that you want. Yes, absolutely. But you also have to understand there's consequences to anything you say. So, when you're building something or your public personality, if you start spouting off and saying shit like that, yes, you can say it, but you have to understand there's consequences. The she who shall not be named will never be invited to Mythcon because of the way
the Voldemort effect.
Right. So you know what I mean? Like that's the point I'm making. Like I am totally a fan. You could say whatever you want to whoever you want. And so can Brian and myself and Michael. But you also have to understand there's consequences with that. So
but I think that's so you take something really like just a straightforward criticism like I think you're everything wrong with atheism and skepticism, and that can start a dialogue and say, well, what do you mean everything wrong? With
I mean, like that one
like
is
you can
is
have,
more pointed, right? But they can both sting. I mean, like any character.
But one of them is a start of a conversation. The other is the end of a conversation. The other is like I don't even want to have a conversation.
Definitely is an end of the conversation. But the other one, like even that you're everything
like
wrong.
One of
you're
those,
setting the person back right. It probably could derail it.
You have to be able to do that though. You can't snowflake people. Step around them.
But
it's like if
hashtag
you have to be able to say like this is what I think, and then they can say like, I think you're wrong, and here's why, and then you can have a conversation.
But everyone can argue what's over.
But the moment you go to you're a sack of crap, you've destroyed all civil conversation. You've eliminated it.
But
that's the
person starting that dialogue, you have to undernd if there could be a better way to phrase certain things, and you'll get a different response. But
one man's beauty is another.
But that's essential.
There are people that make a career over being offensive, which is fine. I'm fine with that. Actually, my favorite brand of stand-up comedy is the more offensive kind. Like that's what makes me laugh the hardest is the stuff that crosses the line purposefully because it's so ridiculous and it's funny. But so when you're having these conversations, you have to understand there are different responses. It's kind of like any video game you play where you get to pick what your answer is going to be. And if you pick, well, go fuck yourself, like the next option is, well, you get some negative points. Or if you pick like, oh, I'll take that into consideration. Well, then you get it, So, I mean, yes. So on social media, I think there needs to be a little bit more tact. And
it's that you got to find that Aristotelian mean. People have to be allowed to say
wherever
things.
that is, right? I don't think I can
be allowed to
tell you
things.
where that is.
People have to be allowed to say things that sting. They have to be allowed to say things that are.
I agree.
Literally, any criticism of you is going to sting, right? So you have to have that. Yeah. But there is going too far, and there is also withholding too much, like being too nice.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
So you have to find that middle ground, and that does require insight and self-criticism and maturity.
Yeah, but
practice.
I'm with that. With the Jordan Peterson thing, I don't think a government should tell people what they should say. If they want to say something ridiculous, well, they're going to get fired. They're going to lose their job. They're going to lose credibility. The government shouldn't come in, the whole thing with
that's very different, right? When you're talking about,
when you guys are talking about the Peterson
like
thing,
Canada and the UK, like they're basically there's suppressions of free speech within their law. Like we have much better free speech protections in the United States.
Yes.
And I agree with that. I think America's free speech model is far superior to the others. But that's because I think that giving state power to do this is a problem in a lot of ways. Like you don't want to give the state that particular kind of power. You at least you want to restrict it as much as possible. That's why like we have like what constitutes unallowed speech. We really like hand wring and decide like, okay, this makes sense to make this illegal. asking someone to kill someone, for example. Like,
Yes.
like
That's
there's
an
certain
obvious limitation of free
intense
speech, right?
Yeah,
and there are
like,
others.
yeah.
There are others. But the point being is like we really want to limit it as much as possible. And the rest is just either take it, ignore it, or respond to it.
Yeah.
And that's the point, is like making it about language and discourse takes the swords and guns out of it. It's essential for civil society, is to actually make this admission that we are going to deal with these things peacefully. So if we're going to have KKK marching through town, we're not going to machine gun them.
Exactly.
We might loathe the fuck out of them. We might criticize the hell out of them,
or just ignore them.
But when we have this social contract agreement, we're going to make it about words and persuasion and discourse. And our own exercise of our own autonomy in deciding where our money goes or where we go or whatever. That's what maintains a civil society. Once you start like running in there with sticks, you're basically saying fuck civil society, right? You're going backwards in history. You're being unhumanistic when you do that. So I think we need to move forward in that way, and that's what comes to like social media. There is a way where you can take that to the point of sticks, not literal sticks, but you can get to like, you know, really making people miserable with harassment and other kinds of things like that. That can go too far. And so you gotta figure out where is the correct medium.
Well, so and I will say, hold on one second. I will say, hold on, where you and I think that's where you and Sargon are gonna agree a lot with that, you know, freedom.
I think we do on that,
So that's really cool.
No, that's fair enough. No, okay, and that's good. Sean was limiting my free speech. I'm kidding. So, $2 from Milwaukee Atheist says, "Here you go. Use it well. Hope we're on the same side." Well, MM does not have a side in this war. We do have a side on dialogue and debate is the way forward. If you believe that, then we're on the same side. Bunty King with $2.79 Canadian. You're everything wrong with white academia. LOL.
Oh, Bunty.
I like that.
Yeah, right.
And then again, I'm joking.
No, right.
But it's rude that you say. I mean, I laughed when I saw it. There was an LOL in there.
Bunty is a funny.
I think that's pretty funny.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I think this is a great conversation. We're really pumped for Mythcon.
Can I ask one? Can I? Can I dig one more? Okay. So Peter Boghossian's also going to be at Mythcon, right?
Yeah.
Peter Boghossian's a philosophy professor at Portland State. Now he's extraordinarily critical of gender studies, the point where he made a mock paper with James Lindsay and others called the Conceptual Penis. This was a complete satirical take, so we won't go into that. But what he says is gender studies is really the epicenter of this. That this is, in a way, what needs to go. What I want to ask you is, what should gender studies be doing? I think you would agree that there are specific professors in gender studies that may be radical, but what is your idea of gender studies that be very beneficial and valuable?
Well, most of it already is. What I would suggest is, so what they did when he did that thing is they published in a shitty pay-for-play journal. It was like literally like not even on the list.
Debate the conceptual
penis.
Like, what should gender studies be doing?
This is my point. Go to an actual gender studies journal that's actually prestigious and actually has a high following.
Can you name one for us? Like, just so we.
No, not off the top of my head. I have a list somewhere, but if you're interested. But it's not hard to find this. You could do it yourself. Figure out what are the top ranked gender studies journals and go get one and just read the articles in it. And then you'll see like what gender studies is really actually doing.
Okay, but there was one in the Hypatia, which is a high, as far as I know, like the scores in the journal, and they were talking about like Rebecca Tuval was arguing for transracialism in this, which I kind of think that's a bit silly, but her argument was that if one can be transgender, then she was using that as a transracial argument. And okay, make of that what you will, but then there was an orthodoxy that tried to get her shut down, and they demanded that the publication withdraw it,
which I think
they did.
Yeah, so to me, I disagree with that. Right, so I think what they should have had is a response piece. Right. But
you can see the person that would say gender studies is a problem. This looks bad.
Yeah, no, but that you're picking like, I agree. There are incidents like that. You can pick specific feminist actions that I disagree with, but that's not gender studies as a field,
right?
And
that's the thing.
Right?
There's individual professors.
Yeah. It's a lot
what
like
should gender studies be doing.
It's not like I think EvoPsych has a lot more garbage science in it than gender science does. And so, and I've shown this. I have a whole article is 90% of EvoPsych false. where I document examples after many examples and go through.
Wow.
There's serious problems.
This would be like a good debate with Dr. Deborah So, somebody like this. You
Yeah.
know, like I don't know.
Well,
I'm not sure if that's true.
I will say this. You know, one of my benefits is I come in as a newborn baby on a lot of these social and political issues. And the only thing I will say about gender studies, this is my, just my personal experience. We've reached out to about 75 or so professors in this field just to have them come and talk about it. And you know, with Peter and Leanne Stanley, amazing.
Dr. Stanley,
Dr. Stanley, fantastic. She's showing up. She's not even a professor, but she deals with
it. She has a PhD.
Slightly different field.
She has a PhD in quantitative psychology. She knows intersectionality really well.
She's like, I'm there, I'm doing this, but
it was hard to find people willing to do it.
We still can't find anyone. We're actually going to be going.
No, to be fair, it could be that we don't understand gender studies enough, the nuances to where we're trying to grab people outside. Just making caveat.
Emails
with the number of people you've asked.
It's very broad. It's like, this is the idea. This is the concept. Most people haven't responded. Some have said, we had one that was like, yeah, I would do it, but my schedule sucks.
Yeah,
but the rest of them were like, no, I have no interest in doing this. And so just again, from an outsider standpoint, that's really bizarre to me. Like, why wouldn't you want to show up? We're paying the flight and all the stuff. And
well,
why wouldn't you want to come talk about what you're
passionate about?
That same kind of attitude was going on in evolution science when they were ignoring creation science and saying, we're not going to debates, we're not going to even talk to you.
Kind of like what Dawkins was doing.
Right. And then there was the change. Then there was the change where it's like, no, what? No, actually, we're going to engage on this.
Okay.
And then, of course, look what happened. We get Talk Origins Archive and all. So we have this really excellent, like they really beat down creationists. And it was because they were, at first, they were acting like the ivory tower academics. It's like, it's beneath us. We're not even going to do it.
That's what Dawkins does, right?
I think in that gender studies being a young science, like, it's a crossover humanities science field.
Yeah.
But I think they're still operating in, they possibly still operating in that naive earlier view of how their academic, what their role is in society. And I find this philosophers do the same thing, where philosophers don't want to like go talk to ordinary audiences about philosophy. You could find some who will, but a lot of them are like, nah, I'm not interested in doing that.
Yeah.
And I think like that you're kind of negating your role.
You don't
in
want
society
academia to lose touch with the common man, right?
It's bizarre.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like, the university is down in support for Republicans.
This is
markedly down.
It's a pervasive problem across all fields of academia, where there's a certain disrespect. We had this. It was going on in the history field about 10 years ago, where there's a lot of hand wringing about historians who choose to leave academia and publish
Stephen Ambrose.
No, but people who publish historians, actual qualified historians who write popular histories for average readers, and go and do this. I'm not going to go through specific names, but who do this and then make careers that way. The academics, the ivory tower, would treat them like pariahs and basically, well, that's base and low, and we're not going to like give you professorships. We're excluding you. We're not going to invite you to conferences and things like that. And there was other historians just saying, no, we shouldn't be doing that. Like, it's our freaking job to like communicate this stuff to the public. And so that kind of debate was hashed out like about 10 years ago, and I think it's changed for the better on that. But the point is it's going on everywhere.
Yeah. Well, there's a really funny example that we have firsthand knowledge. It's the ancient alien dudes. The archaeologist profession are so weird about talking to the public, and we had
well, there's another reason for that though, because this is a Fox News problem, and it goes all the way back to one of my first articles I wrote for a magazine. Is when this is a long time ago, like 15, 20 years ago. Fox News did this aliens built the pyramids documentary, like it was for like real news.
Yeah, like it's real.
And then and they interviewed all these real people and all these cranks and stitched their interviews together to make it look like the serious people.
Yes, I do remember that project.
And all those people interviewed felt fucking burned, and they were like, okay, I don't trust anyone in the media anymore, because you're in that.
We talked to one of those people that was in that documentary.
Yeah, they keep doing that. And so there's a reason why archaeologists don't trust media.
Yeah, but the problem is they're losing the narrative, because that crazy dude, Mekapanekis or whatever his last name is, the Greek guy, he's on Discovery Channel talking about how this is history.
Well,
they've lost the narrative, like the real archaeologists that are like, this is all BS.
I don't think that's the archaeologist's fault. I think that's largely a profit-driven cable channel.
Oh, for sure.
Because there used to be, there was like when you had the History Channel, when the History Channel used to do history rather than crank shit. Like it's, it evolved into the Hitler Channel, and then evolved into like weird
ass.
That
was real history.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then it evolved into like weird ass shit that has nothing to do with it. I remember I saw a documentary they did on it was a serious discussion for an hour long about what murder weapon Cain used to kill Abel.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, come on, you guys have sold the fuck out.
Exactly.
But they used to. There's someone had asked me long ago. There was Discovery Channel.
Like a cattle prod.
Right.
Yes.
Discovery
anachronistic.
Channel and History Channel were competing for the history content way back. It was 20, 30 years ago. And they both did the series of programs on ancient science. And this is I was getting it. It was not 30 years ago. This was more recent. But anyway, so doing these programs on ancient science, and I noticed like one of them was just crap, and the other one was really good.
Yeah.
And there were archaeologists enthusiastic in participating in that, and historians and things like that. But then the History Channel just stopped doing, or I don't know which one it was. One of them was doing the good one, and one was doing the bad one. But it just evolved. Both channels just starting.
They had to make room for ice road truckers, right? Okay. So, like in reality TV, okay, we got
it's a media problem.
There's multiple.
Yeah.
Just like anything.
One other super chat. This is from Jake Kershaw, and if I screwed up your name, I'm sorry. Will Carrier be debating anyone or anyone besides Sargon? Well, not at the Mythcon.
Not at this.
Not at Mythcon. But there is a debate table or several debate tables that we had, and unless you check this out, the first Mythcon, where you can debate other and some of the speakers, some of the special guests. At times when they're not doing this, other attendees at the debate table. So in that case, if Carrier finds himself at one of the debate tables, he could be potentially debating anyone. So if you're going to come to Mythcon and you can get Dr. Carrier to do that, awesome.
That would be awesome.
We'll link that up
awesome.
And we'll set that up.
I do have one more idea for you, and this is another interesting similarity you and Sargon have is your love of history. And I know he's been reading a lot of your work, and he's really a fan of the ancient the work that you've done on ancient history and stuff.
Yeah, Sargon of Akkad would be bad choice.
Outside of, right, exactly. Like he obviously knows the moniker. And when he was on Joe Rogan, it was really interesting to me because that's when I was kind of getting first interested into Sargon. And he was talking about the myths, and he was talking about how these myths have influenced the religions, and like how really the timeline. Like he knows a lot about this, the mythicist portion of it, or at least the I think what you guys like after this debate, it would be a cool project to see you guys work on like some ancient history project. I think that would be kind of neat because he knows a lot about it and you know a lot about it. Who knows? Future collab.
That would be.
I'm always come up with ideas. I'm an ideas guy.
Yeah.
Someone asked like
that's for consideration.
What's the subject of your textbooks? And I'm like, which one comes to mind?
Oh,
it literally is a fountain of knowledge on lots of religions. If you want to find the myth arc, you want to see where Christianity got some of the stuff. I could let you explain, but we'd probably take 10 minutes. But what about some of like the history stuff that your latest? What are you? Yeah, let's hit that one.
The latest book's out. The last two books are basically. I had to shelve my dissertation. I mean, I finished it and all that, but I put it on the shelf to do the postdoc work on historicity of Jesus. That's what my fans hired me to do. So I've blown the dust off of that and then turned it into books. So it's Science Education in the Early Roman Empire, and The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire. And that grew out of, this is another example of like Christians often like have walls of bullshit and lies that they do, but there's often some kernel of something really interesting in there.
Not all Christian, not the modern Christians, right? Because they're just believing what they're
right. But no, I run into this. There's certain Christians who make these arguments, so.
But a kernel of
kernel of something genuinely interesting in there, and one of them was why did the scientific revolution not happen in the ancient world? And of course, they have Christian apologetic excuses as to why that is, and that's all based on false information and fallacies.
Yeah, I've never actually heard.
And I've written about that, of the false information and the fallacies of the Christian explanation. But the question remains, and it remains an interesting question. And you could get rid of the rhetoric and say, well, that's actually an interesting historical question. And so my latest books, The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire and Science Education, were written as part of a project to actually start explaining that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's almost like, why didn't the Renaissance come out of antiquity? Is that?
Yeah, right, exactly. And a lot of people don't know how close they got, right? They don't know how much science was actually accomplished, how sophisticated it got in the ancient world. So those books, I'm really proud of finally getting those out because no one's really done anything quite like what I did.
Yeah.
And no one has done science education in the ancient world. The reason I had to do that for my dissertation what I was going to do is do like a paragraph and cite a bibliography, right? Or like one page and cite the bibliography of the other scholars who'd nailed it. And I did full research. I actually studied under Raffaele Carbiori, who's like one of the leading experts in ancient education at Columbia University, read everything on ancient education, and no one had done the ancient science education. No one, like, ever. And there's like maybe a paragraph, and they'll say like, well, in science education was a little different, but this, we don't have room to cover that here, and we're going to move on. And I would see that again and again and again.
You're the little hourglass. Click here if you want the real story.
And then me, I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to have to freaking do this. And so that book is the first book ever on specifically that.
So we have another super chat from Jake Kershaw. He didn't put anything in here, but I do see a text after. It says, will Carrier be starting a YouTube channel anytime in the future? That was supposed to be my super chat message. Right, because he did the dollars in blank. Yeah.
Thanks for the super
So
chat.
I did see that.
That's great.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any plans to. I don't have the skills, talent, or equipment for it, much less capital to do that well.
Yeah.
Other people do it really well. I'm completely willing to like be guests on people's shows who are already nailing how to do the format and everything.
You're always a very popular guest too.
Yeah, and I love doing the shows, so it's certainly worth, you know, writing me, email me. You can find me through richardcarrier.info. It has all my contact info there. And if you've got a podcast or a vidcast or something and you want to go look through, if you look on my booking page, how to book Richard Carrier, on the bottom, it has a list of things I talk about. That's also a list of things like you could interview me about on the show. And so I love doing those things. So it's better for other people to produce the content. And then the only thing is no one warehouses it in one place, I realize. So you have to go to YouTube and Richard Carrier and see what you get.
Yeah, you get it. There's a ton of hits too.
But that's just true with Christopher Hitchens as well.
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens didn't have a YouTube channel. You can pick him up everywhere, and like that stuff's awesome.
Yeah, and you're also on Twitter. People can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Facebook. You can follow my Facebook page, and my blog, of course. You can follow my blog, subscribe to it, and so on.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people are excited with your segment. I think a lot of people are excited with Mythcon in general. I always tell people, don't listen to the critics. It's all BS. They're not showing up. They never been to one ever, and you've been to every single one but the second one.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know that we're not white Nazis or rape apologists. You know.
No, you're right. I would take a critique more seriously if they had gone to Mythcon than if you had.
Now all of a sudden, if you started saying this after this year, then I'd say, okay, maybe we're doing something wrong. But no, I mean, the next step for us is to start lining up the conversations with the panel speakers and then their moderator. So we're starting to get the we're booking flights and all this stuff. So we're starting. It's coming up, and we're really getting excited. So again, thank you so much for coming and doing it again.
Sure. Yeah.
And
you run a good event, I have to say. Like, it's been consistently excellent every event you put on. So
I appreciate that. And is there anything else you want to talk about as far as what's coming up for you? Are there any debates coming up?
No debates coming up. Nothing big really, but for people that are interested, like, help support my work basically. So become a patron on Patreon, support like the blogging I do, big articles on various things, traditional atheist stuff, as well as everything else. And take my courses, my online courses. Every month I have an online course on something in philosophy or history for average people to like learn some skills that you would only get at college. There's no academic credit for it, but it's just 1 month. There's, no particular times you have to be there. You can participate as much or as little as you want. And you get to like pick the brain of an expert on the subject and then do some reading materials, do some challenge questions and stuff like that.
And especially today where all this coming up and you got to argue either for or against free speech.
I got to train
like
people over
here. Having these concepts is huge though. Knowing the philosophy behind them is going to make you, whether side you're on, a lot better